It's my pleasure to introduce our guest and keynote speaker. Dr. Michael Wesch is Associate Professor of Cultural Anthropology at Kansas State University. Dubbed the Explainer by Wired magazine, Dr. Wesch explores the effects of new media on global societies and cultures. His videos on culture, technology, education, and information have been viewed by millions, translated in over 15 languages, and are frequently featured at international film festivals and major academic conferences worldwide. Professor Wesch has won several major awards for his work, including a Wired Magazine Rave Award, the John Culkin Award for Outstanding Practices in Media Ecology, and he was named an Emerging Explorer by National Geographic. He has also won several teaching awards, including the Case Carnegie U.S. Professor of the Year for Doctoral and Research Universities. I had the pleasure of being in the audience for a Mike Wesch presentation. That was in Jacksonville, Florida in November of 13, and that was for a CCAS, which is a Council of Colleges of Arts and Sciences meeting, filled with deans and those stodgy kind of types, not exactly live wires. After about 2 minutes, we were completely enthralled with Professor Wesch's presentation. And especially when we saw a video of his teaching and the great impact and his pedagogical innovation and how he engages students and the rest of us in thinking very differently about the world around us. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Michael Wesch, or Mike Wesch.
Do I need to flip a switch here?
Oh yeah.
Okay, that's all right. All right, so I am an anthropologist. That means I study all humans in all times and all places. So it's a very big picture that I tend to look at. I need to show some pictures of dinosaurs real quick. Yeah. I'll tell a joke. Okay. All right. All right. So let's see. What do you want me to talk about? I really wanted to lead with my dinosaurs. I'm gonna give it 2 more seconds.
Biking to the airport.
What's that?
Biking.
Yeah. All right, I can do that. I'll tell you about my morning. All right. So this morning I live in a small town, 50,000 people. Kansas State University takes up half of that. The airport's about 7 miles from my house. One of the things you'll find interesting about me is that while I study technology, I don't live with a lot of technology. I'm almost Amish. I don't own a car, which means when I need to get to the airport, I either need to take a cab, which is cabs are very hard to get in a town of 50,000 because they actually don't run. So I have a bike, and so I bike to the airport. And so this morning, I had this wonderful experience of, it's like 7 miles, it's 4:30 in the morning, and I'm biking under the moon, and then I'm actually like having a great time. This is part of why I'm technology free. This is going to be interesting given my talk. But why I'm so Amish is because I find that while I love technology and I love to like dive into it when I'm at work, I also like to dive out of it. And I feel like I have a better perspective on technology by diving out of it. So here I am on my bike, and I don't know if any of you bike anywhere, but if you bike in the middle of the night for long periods of time, you tend to have a really good time. And so I was riding along singing some song. It was, I want to celebrate and live my life. And then the moon's shining in, and then suddenly the moon disappears and clouds are rolling in, and it starts to thunder, and then it starts to rain, and then it's like pouring, and I'm sure like there's not a lot of cars in a small town like this, but the couple of cars that drove by me, I'm sure they were pitying me. But in reality, I was having the best time. and like the lyrics started to change, because I'm still singing, but now I'm singing in the rain. And I'm singing something about how I don't have a proper change of pants in my bags, and that's okay. I can't remember the lyrics, but anyway, that's actually a pretty good foreshadowing of the talk I'm going to give in a second. So here's the dinosaurs. Contrary to popular belief, anthropologists don't study dinosaurs, but I am interested in these dinosaurs, because these dinosaurs they wake up at night and they eat stuff in the kitchen, and they destroy things. And so the kids, these two parents started doing this last November, and they do it every night. And so every day their kids would wake up and wonder, like, oh, what did our dinosaurs get into today? And the kids think these dinosaurs are actually alive. And then it starts to take off on Twitter and Instagram and all kinds of social media. So the Today Show picks up on it, and pretty soon there's the hashtag DinoVember, and lots of people are posting their own. It becomes like a whole trend. It starts to trend on Twitter, and there's all these wonderful things happening. And then all the media people started asking them, why are you doing this? And they said, because in the age of iPads and Netflix, we don't want our kids to lose their sense of wonder and imagination. In a time when the answers to all the world's questions are a web search away, we want our kids to experience a little mystery. All it takes is some time and energy, creativity, and a few plastic dinosaurs. And so, a core element of my talk today is about that word wonder, and what it looks like, why it's actually hard to achieve in our society, and why it's so important in today's world. So let me start with a vision of wonder. This is from 2011. This is in Wellington, New Zealand, where it never snows. It's almost like it's snowing in San Bernardino. It doesn't snow here either, right? So it does. Okay. Well, so here it starts to snow, right? And everybody's kind of caught out in it. We should have audio in here. So so you can see nobody's like ducking away from this or running into the stores. They're actually running out of the stores. So this is quite a moment, right? These people are in wonder. And when you're in wonder, you feel more connected to each other. You feel more connected to the world around you. And you feel like this sense of, it's almost like even a walk can feel enchanted. And there are really two sides of wonder, and I want to talk about both of those sides today. One side is that kind of sense of elation, like when we talk about being in wonder, and that excitement that you feel with that elation. But sometimes that elation turns to investigation. You want to know more. And that's why wonder is so important in today's world. It's not just about that sense of elation and that sense of finding your place and knowing where you are and feeling connected to the world around you, but also that sense of just wanting to explore the world around you. And the more you do this, the more you're like a kid. The more you learn, the more questions open up, the more wonder opens up. You start to see connections where you thought you might never see connections. And suddenly, every little thing starts to matter. So what I want to talk about in today's class, today's lecture, is about how wonder is, in a way, harder to achieve because of all the technologies around us, and yet those very technologies can actually be leveraged to not only achieve wonder yourself, but actually help others achieve wonder as well. So that's the idea. And so I want to start here. As you know, this is just kind of the beginning. If you look anywhere into the future, you'll see that this isn't where we're stopping here. We're headed towards ubiquitous computing, ubiquitous communication, ubiquitous information, and limited speed about everything, everywhere, from anywhere, and all kinds of devices. And that has certain effects. And the only way to really know these effects is to get outside of this world in some way. If you're just immersed in media, it's very hard to see media's effects. So that's why I started going to New Guinea as a graduate student and tried to get as far away as possible. So I went out of the cities, I headed for the center of the island, and I tried to go to those places that were literally off the map. And these places quite literally were off the map, the places that I would end up. This is the last place that's on the map. And on the backside of this mountain is off the map. So I land on this airstrip. There's no plumbing or electricity, no internet access of any sort. So you're completely disconnected. Even your money's no good once you land. There's no place to spend money. There's no cash economy here. This is all a gift economy. So I land, and this is my greeting when I first get there. And then this is a place where planes come in like once every 6 weeks or so. So once the plane leaves, I'm back here again. And I decide I'm just gonna like keep going. And I just want to go over that mountain into that uncharted territory. Just go as far as I can. And so I'm walking past villages like this, and I run into this guy. And apparently you're not supposed to be this close to these things, but I was a small town kid from Nebraska and really didn't know any better. And so then I come into this village, and this is where I would spend the bulk of my time for the next 8 years. So as a graduate student, if I wasn't in a library carrel reading a book, I was in this village here. And I'll just give you a quick tour of what it looks like. Again, no media to speak of. They grow their own taro, sweet potato, and bananas. They raise pigs. They eat spiders and snakes. And snakes are actually kind of a good deal. They like snakes, after they eat, they get lazy and they lay around, and they're really easy to catch at that point. So you can catch them and then you can cut them open and you get the appetizer. So that's kind of a fun thing. And they're really, like this is just after the snake. We ate the snake that day, and then this is the hut where I'm staying. These are actually my legs. This is my sleeping bag. I used to call my sleeping bag my little America. I would wrap myself up in my sleeping bag just to protect myself from all the elements. They just discovered a 5-pound rat, which if I knew anything about species identification, I could have found that thing. 'Cause I saw it first. It wasn't that hard to see. So these things are crawling around. So I would seal myself up, but it's tropics, so in the middle of the night, the sleeping bag would come off of me and I have to wipe the bugs off and then seal myself back up again. And this night, I'm looking around after we ate the snake, and there's holes everywhere in these houses. And that snake was found like 100 feet away, and I figured it has family, so I'm extra careful to wrap myself up. And that night, the sleeping bag comes off of me, and I wake up, and I can feel this thing laying across my chest, like this big around, just laying here. And I managed to grab it with my left hand, and I threw it off of me. But as I threw it, I rolled with it, so somehow I'm wrapped up with this thing. And I managed to get it pinned down with my left hand, and I try to free my right arm so I can pin it down with 2 hands, but I can't move my right arm. And it's about this time I realized I've actually pinned down my own right arm. My arm had just fallen asleep and was across the room. So there was no snake. And then at this point, I only understand one word. This is a word they've adopted from English. So basically it's blah, 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 blah. And then the one word I understand, which is white man, and then laughing. It's like blah, 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 white man, and then laughing. And it goes on and on. And then, so then I'm walking, this all sounds really kind of funny, but the reality is this is a terrible time for me, a really terrible time. And I remember walking along at one point and seeing this beautiful landscape around me. And this was a dream of mine. I had always dreamed of really getting out there in the world and seeing a place that nobody had ever seen before. And to have it be this beautiful, should have been great, but it wasn't. I was extremely sad and very lonely, and I was walking along this ridge, and I just was so sad that I actually started to feel weak. And I never felt anything like that before, but I started getting weak, and then I just kind of collapsed on the side of this ridge, and I'm just crying there. And these 2 guys walk up beside me, and by the time they get to me, they're crying too. So we're sitting there crying on the side of this mountain together. And then, and I immediately start to feel better actually. And, but I'm still crying, and they're crying, and then they say, they asked me why I'm crying, and the only thing I could think at that point was that I miss my wife. So I said, I miss my wife. And they started laughing and laughing, and they said, oh, we would never miss our wives. and then they started crying again, and they said, oh, we miss our kids, and then we're all sitting there crying. And that was the beginning of the upturn, because suddenly I felt this strong connection And those guys became like my best friends, and we're still really good friends to this day. And this is them here with their 2 kids, these 2 guys here. And this is like, we're all brothers actually. Now we call each other brother, and we share the same family and so on. So this became my family there. And it's interesting to think about what was happening there, right? Where, these 2 guys are following along with me. They barely know me. And then suddenly they're crying with me on the side of this mountain, which is a tremendous display of empathy. And it turns out, empathy is actually, in some studies, in fact, all studies on empathy right now are showing that empathy is on the decline in this generation. And you can see what they're blaming it on. I think this is a very, not a very sophisticated analysis yet. I'm going to try to give you my sophisticated analysis in just a moment. But I do think it's interesting that empathy is on the decline when we're trying to look at wonder. We're trying to figure out, is wonder on the decline too? Nobody can measure wonder. But empathy is the capacity to imagine your way into somebody else's perspective, which in a way is a whole lot like wonder. Like, can you cut across differences and actually see into somebody else's perspective? That's a powerful thing to do. And we're seeing that students are reporting less and less of that these days. So you think about, why is it that empathy would thrive in a situation like this? And now immediately you might think about media, right? Because when you look at this scene and you realize that these people are so deeply connected with each other, the first thing you notice is, well, maybe it's because there's no TV in the corner of the room, or they're not turning to their screens, or being distracted from each other. They are deeply involved in each other's lives and really sharing each other's lives. But I'll take it even a step further, because in a single picture you can't really see it all. But over the course of several years, like 8 years, like I spent there, you notice that not only do they share their lives, they also share their deaths. They share everything, and there's no way to hide any of this. We hide so much of our, sort of the darkness of ourselves and darkness of our lives, death and so on, that we don't really realize what it is to really sit with death and to sit through a death. This is my friend Joseph, who we were playing soccer on Wednesday, and by that Friday he was sick, and I still was kind of in my American mindset, like, people get sick, he's sick, that's fine, he's just sick. But by midnight that night, he had crossed that line from which you don't cross back, right? And for me, that was the first time I'd seen that. It wouldn't be the last. In New Guinea, you sort of see that a lot. And I remember thinking just how vulnerable I felt then at that moment, and everybody around me felt vulnerable. We were all kind of scared together. And I think it's from those moments, though, that empathy arises. That sense of shared vulnerability is where empathy blossoms. So you look at our society and you see that we've used technologies, not just like the new stuff, like the screens, but everything over the last 150 years. Transportation technologies, communication technologies, all of these things can actually open us up more to one another, but we've actually used them to block ourselves off. So we moved into boxes and then shopped in boxes where we don't know where stuff is coming from or who's selling it to us. And then we look back into the world through these boxes. And then over time, we've just moved into more boxes, shopped in bigger boxes, and looked back at the world through these boxes. So technology is allowing us to do like all the things you might think of that are associated with wonder, right? Technology could allow us to quest in ways we've never quested before, ask questions we've never asked before, go farther than we've ever gone before, make connections in ways we've never made connections before, and take chances we've never taken before. But technology also allows you to not do these things, to actually shut yourself off from the world, to not quest, to not make connections, to not take chances. And over again, over the last 150 years, we, as a society, continue to take the easy way out, so that by the year 2000, Robert Putnam was able to say, we're bowling alone. And he had all kinds of interesting statistics to show that we are less connected than ever before, even while communications technologies were more powerful than ever before. Livien de Couture called it the capsular civilization, that we live in capsules and then put ourselves in other capsules, the car, to take us to the next capsule. And all the while we're disconnected from the world around us. There's a really interesting story to really put this in stark relief. It's from Peter White. Peter White is a reporter for the BBC, outstanding reporter. He's been all over the world. This is him in Kenya. He grew up in the 1950s, And he talks about growing up in the 1950s, his parents let him roam the neighborhood freely. He could go anywhere he wanted, even as a very small child. Then he learned to ride a bike, so he could hopefully go a little further. And then by the time he was 12, he was already hitchhiking up to 100 miles a day, and then getting back by that night. And his parents encouraged this. He wasn't doing this behind their backs. They were encouraging this. And you think about what that is and what that represents compared to today, especially when you consider Peter White is blind. And he's always been blind. And so as a little kid, his parents were letting him run around his neighborhood, and he can't see anything, but they wanted him to do that because they thought that was important. He learned to ride a bike, and he had the scars to prove it, but he was going to do it because everybody else was doing it. And then he goes he hitchhikes 100 miles with a stranger he can't see. He's putting a trust in a stranger he can't see. That's a level of public trust we can't even imagine today. And this has huge effects on our own childhoods and how we've grown up and how much we've opened up to the world, how much we open up to each other. There's some studies that show that kids now explore about 1/9 of the area of the previous generation, and that's held for several generations. So at this point, we're exploring just a very small fraction of what our own grandparents or great-grandparents might have explored. And just as a comparison here, this is a friend of mine in New Guinea, and that's a real knife. I don't know if you see the difference here. It's pretty serious. So back to New Guinea. So we're trying to figure out, how do we understand the effects of media? How do we understand, and we're talking broad effects now, right? Broad societal effects. So while I was in New Guinea, about 4 years into my stay, something really dramatic happened. New media came in. New media didn't come in the form of YouTube and Facebook and all that stuff. It came in the form of writing. Writing was the new medium for them. Nobody had written, there was no written census or written maps or written laws or anything. And then suddenly it came. And it came in the hands of a handful of guys who had been walking about 7 days to go get an education. And so it took them about 20 years to get through the 10th grade. And now they were back, and one of them was an official government officer. And the rest of them were going to help him create a census and a map and put this place on the map. This is like one of those last uncharted territories. This is what it looks like when a place gets chartered. So they come in with a census, and all they have to do is write down the names of people and put it in the book. This actually turns out to be difficult because most of these people don't have names. And they don't have names because everybody they've ever seen they already know. And they have a relationship with everybody they know. And they name each other according to that relationship. Just like when you're in your family, you might call somebody honey or baby, or you might have son, daughter, and so on. These are all relationship names. Those name relationships. They don't name the person. And now they had to come up with a name for their person. So you can see how it's going to shift their notions of identity right from the get-go. They actually had to borrow an English word here, census name, in order to designate this new designation that they needed for the census book. And then other things started to happen. They used to build their villages like this, where the houses only have one hole in them, that's the door, and they would face the door toward people that they were related to or people that they liked. And you could always walk into a village and know exactly who was related to who just by how their village was arranged. And then they started designing their villages on paper in straight streets, and they created these straight line houses here with each house numbered to match the census book. So the book is in a way literally rewriting how they live. And then finally, in terms of how they settle disputes, this is what a dispute used to look like. It'd be these two guys here are in a debate, and everybody's come out here into the open to talk about it. And the goal is to heal this relationship. It's not to figure out who's wrong or to establish guilt or to sentence anybody. It's just to heal the relationship. When the law books came in, suddenly we were brought, people who were accused of a crime or a dispute were brought into a court of law and held up against the letter of the law as individuals. So all these things are changing the way they're thinking about themselves, changing about their ideas about their relationship to one another as well as to the state. And so then these 10 government officers get together, these guys who've been walking, to get an education, now they come back and they become government officers. And they had this plan that they wanted to move everybody into these large villages so that they could administer it easier and get more funding, because the bigger your village, the more funding you get from the government. So they want to move people into these houses, and that involved actually burning people's houses and moving them into these large villages. And it was getting very contentious. Obviously, people did not like having their houses burned. So these government officers get together and they have a meeting. And the first order of business and the first meeting ever in the center of the island of New Guinea was, shall we have more meetings? And they unanimously voted yes, we shall have more meetings. And then the second order of business was, should we continue to burn houses and move people into these larger villages? And they decided that the only people who would be allowed to vote would be government officers, people who could read and write. You guys ever heard of that rule before? Yeah. That's got a history. And they voted unanimously to continue to burn houses. And so what's interesting is 3 months after all this happened, this was like a terrible time during my field work. Eventually, the people sort of rebelled against the government movement, and this thing stopped. And at the end of this, the government officers looked around and really felt like they didn't like the changes that they had helped to create. That in a way, they actually talked about it in a way as if they'd been seduced by the medium. The medium with its clean lines and it looks so beautiful on paper, but when you tried to do it in real life, it was a mess. And they felt seduced by the medium. And so I started wondering, like, when I came back to the United States, I started wondering, like, are we being seduced in some way? Is there some way that media affects us that we're not aware of? So the take-home point here is that media are not just tools. You hear this a lot, that they're just tools. But it's not really that simple, nor are they just means of communication. Media mediate relationships. They change what can be said, how it can be said, who can say it, who can hear it. Each medium has its own shape and shapes the relationships involved. So in media change, relationships change. And here's what's really interesting. Can we go so far as to say that habits change as well? Concepts, values? Do those things change too? Like, that's the more intriguing thing to ask. So let's take a look here. So television, for example, the moment television comes into a living room, you can see how the relationships change. Just in the way the furniture is arranged. The furniture all turns toward the corner of the room, and everybody's watching the TV. And all the conversations of our culture are happening here on television, rather than in a small group around, say, like a hearth or a fire. And then we get sort of this blast of media in the cable revolution, and our children are suddenly raised by media, right? So here's a young girl in the Dove ad that you guys have probably seen before, just getting blasted by media. Volume again. And you can just leave it up if you want, and I'll control it from up here. But you get the idea here that these girls are getting blasted with media images about who they're supposed to be, what they're supposed to look like, and so on. And as Marshall McLuhan says, we shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. So we're interested in this big question of whether or not media can really shape the way we think. So part of this whole idea comes from the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Has anybody heard of this? Yes. So it says it comes from linguistics, and the idea here is that language can actually shape how we see the world and shape your concepts as well. So, for example, this is 1963 was the first time any Westerner got close to the area where I did my work. I did my work just right over here on this line, just to the west of where it says no population. The reason why this area became so isolated was because it's right on an international border, and colonialists from the east came as close as they wanted to the border, and the colonialists from the west also came close, but they never got right to the border, so that all the border people were basically left alone. What's interesting about this trip is that as they walk from village to village, they're asking people who they are, and they're trying to make their maps, right? So their whole idea is we're going to make a map of what this place looks like. So they go to this place and they say, who are you guys? And they say, we're the Tefalming, and they write it down. And they go to the next one and say, who are you? And we say, we're the Rapmen, and they write it down. Then this is where it gets interesting though. Once they cross out into here, they've reached a language barrier. They don't understand the language very well. And so they have some translation issues. So for example, all along here, they're asking people, who are you? And the people say, we're the Nalaman. And they say, well, who's over the mountain there? And they say, oh, that's the Kufalman. And they walk over the mountain and say, who are you guys? We're the Nalaman. They'd say, well, who lives over the mountain? The Kefalman. They go over the mountain, they'd say, are you guys the Kefalman? No, we're the Nalaman. The Kefalman are over the next mountain. And they keep doing this. It turns out Nalaman just means us, and Kefalman means them. But there's actually something even more interesting about this, and that is that people always name themselves in terms of relationships. Remember what I was talking about earlier with the names of people? They didn't have these categorical names of the person. They also don't have categorical names of their groups. They think of their groups always in relation to other groups. And this goes into their whole way they talk about space, the way that they greet each other. It's a relational space world. For example, when you want to say, how are you doing? You just want to greet somebody, you actually say, where are you going? And people will respond, you say, Nelly Yongi Katobani, for example, you say, I'm going to the garden. But it's much more sophisticated than that, because when you say this word katobani, which means going, it actually means going down to, you're engaging in this very complex relational space thing, where you have to know exactly which direction you're heading. You have to know exactly which direction the person you're coming from is heading. So you're always very aware of what direction you're facing. Now I'll just ask you, do you guys, anybody in here know which direction you're facing right now? How many people think they know? And a whole bunch of you don't know, right? A person from New Guinea will know exactly which way they're facing. Not only like facing west, but something more like we're facing west, southwest to the middle, and then there's like a whole bunch of like qualifiers. And if somebody says, where are you going? Or like basically, how are you doing? You respond, you have to like put that in the as infixes and suffixes and prefixes into the language that you're actually speaking. So this has some very interesting effects. Lots of languages do this, and Lara Brodowski at Stanford has pointed out that it gives them a really interesting capacity. They have dead reckoning, like pigeons. Do you guys know about these pigeons? These pigeons that were like in World War II, for example, and the Allies would carry them with them. So British troops would go into Italy, and they would attack a village, right? And if they took the village, they would send a pigeon back to the U.S. troops to say, we got the village, and the pigeon would have this little message on it. And the pigeon, even though it's like in a tiny little box, in a closed box for a 20-mile ride, would know exactly how to get back to where the troops were. And many people were saved over the years from this, because if you don't get that message back, then a bomb raid comes in and blasts the village. So you had to get these pigeons back to say, don't bomb the village, we've already taken it. So these pigeons have this amazing capacity to know exactly where they are and get back to where they started from, just like these people who speak these languages that involve this complex calculus of knowing exactly which direction you're facing, which way other people are facing as you're talking to them, do as well. But the question is, in that sense, language is a technology that's shaping their capacities. And what about things like this? When you have GPS, how is that shaping our capacities to find our way around? Are we actually losing, in some sense, our ability to find our own way around? This is a famous question from Nick Carr, right? Nick Carr asks, is Google making us stupid? And he goes into this long analysis of what the internet is doing to our brains. There's all kinds of studies that show that we read differently because of the internet. We read in an F pattern now. An F pattern means you go down, and then you go across the top, and then you go halfway, and then you go halfway across there, and then you go down to the next page. It's like a skimming capacity that we've developed. So Nick Carr has pointed out there's 4 categories of technologies. The 4th and most important is these intellectual technologies that actually, they sort of do part of the thinking for us. So I'm going to spend 10 minutes scaring you guys. Is that cool? So we're going to talk about the future for a second, but it's actually not the future. It's right now. But a lot of people think it's the future because a lot of people are unaware of what's happening right now. So I mentioned earlier that we're headed toward all these things. And a lot of people like to pay attention to networks, information, speed, devices. Like that's what people think of when they think about stuff. They rarely think of computing as the important revolutionary piece here. But let me show you a few things that might change your mind about that. So you guys may have seen this. This is a computer that took on the best Jeopardy champions of all time and beat them handily. As Ken Jennings said, I, for one, welcome our new computer overlords. And it gets more interesting than that, right? This is Lipson and Schmidt at Cornell University. they do these experiments in which they create computer programs that can think, sort of. They try to create computer programs that can create formulas for complex phenomena like a double pendulum. So here's a double pendulum, and it's just going to start doing its thing, and it looks like total chaos. Now they've got a computer looking at it, and it's graphing all of the movements that thing is making, and now it's trying out different formulas against it. And you can see it can try out formulas very quickly, and it creates a decision tree that's going to create a formula that gets closer and closer to predicting what's going to happen next with that double pendulum. That's what's happening here. It eventually gets to basically perfectly predictive. It's called a Hamiltonian equation, which is very complex. And what's really interesting then is they release this program, which can find basically patterns in big data sets. And they release it for free online. It's called Eureka, if you want to look it up and try it yourself. So some cell biologists, for example, picked this up, and they tried it out, and they had this really complex data set about how cells how they die and then regenerate and so on. And so they put this complex data set to Eureka, and Eureka solved problems scientists hadn't been able to solve for a long time. This computer program was able to create a formula that explained past data as well as predicted new data. But here was a problem.
The equation was right.
These equations match the data, and in fact they explain new data.
These equations could even predict what the cell was about to do. But, hold the champagne, there's just one little problem here. The formulas check out, but...
We don't know what they mean.
You don't know what they mean.
So that's an interesting moment in science, right? Where we actually have computers doing stuff that humans can't do. In fact, even when this goes all the way back to like the PlayStation 3. In order to create the PlayStation 3, IBM actually had to create another chip that could then run the computer that would help them crunch the numbers to create the chip that went in the PS3. Did you guys know that? So we're already like using intellectual technologies to do vast amounts of heavy lifting for us. And these things are very present in our everyday lives in ways you might not know. For example, this is the largest trading floor in the world, and you actually don't see a lot of humans here. You see a lot of computers. Computers actually make about 80% of the trades on Wall Street. Here's a headline, for example, that shows you what computers are up to. So this is a Bloomberg News headline release. It says here, this is released in 2011, 1208, 12.679. Notice it goes down to the thousandths of a second. Now this is important because if you look at the stock that it's referring to, and you look at the thousandths of a second, it goes down to here. When you look at, say, 4 seconds later in the stock market, this is what happened in the 4 seconds after that headline came out. The stock spikes and then it comes back. And here's the problem if you're a human being. If you're a human being, it takes you 4 seconds to read that headline. It would take you at least another second to make a decision on whether you want to buy or sell. By that time, it's already over. You missed it. And that's what these computers are actually doing, is they're actually working in a whole totally different ecosystem. They call it the algorithmic ecosystem, which is, these are at time scales that humans cannot even react. They did a study of chess players. These are the best chess players in the world. They studied how long it took them to react. And it took them, this is basically the line here that limits human decision making. And you can see all of the algorithms are doing their thing at shorter time limits. It takes us 3 seconds to read a headline or a tweet. It takes us 7 minutes or so to read an article, almost 3 hours to read a journal article. All those things that would give us input to make a decision, and the world moves on without us far faster than that. So you might have heard of this. This is interesting. This is called the flash crash of 245, when the Dow sunk 1,000 points in just like that, like in an instant. And the reason why it did that was because these algorithms kind of got went a little haywire. They try to game each other, and people build algorithms to game other algorithms, and suddenly they went into sort of a strange feedback loop, and the Dow crashed, and then it bounced right back, but not quite all the way back. The weird thing about flash crash at 245 is that we still don't know exactly what happened. So again, we have these technologies that are kind of just beyond our grasp of what they're actually doing and what's happening to our lives. So here's one a little bit closer to home. This is Target. This guy walked into the Target the main Target store in Minneapolis about a year ago, and he was really upset because he had just gotten a coupon book sent to his daughter, who's 15, and it was full of ads about, for like pregnancy stuff and child stuff. And he's like, "What are you doing sending this to my 15-year-old daughter?" And they're very apologetic. It's like, "We're very sorry, very sorry." And then 2 days later, he calls back and he says, "I have to apologize. It turns out there was stuff going on in my house I didn't know about." So his daughter was pregnant, and Target knew before he did. And the reason Target knew was because they have an algorithm that's crunching the data on all your purchases. And it wasn't so simple as her buying, say, prenatal vitamins. That would be obvious, right? What she had done was she had bought some unscented lotion and some cloths, like some washcloths. And there's apparently a 70% chance you're pregnant when you purchase those two things together. It's just something pregnant people buy. and so like this is you've heard that word big data. The social side of big data is that it's a lot of commercialism, of course, companies sort of knowing what you're all about. But here's how subtle it gets. This is a company called Hunch that their expertise is in this kind of thing. They take big data sets of mundane information. There is, in a sense, a database of the most mundane stuff about all of us. And it includes all your purchases, it includes your clicks and all that stuff. And when you analyze all of that, you discover some really interesting things. For example, if you prefer pencils versus gel pen users, you're more likely to bike to work. If you're gel pen users, you're 23% more likely to drive alone to work. And you could only know that with a really big data set. There's no way that's going to show up as statistically significant in a small data set. But this mundane stuff actually becomes significant in very large data sets. So Netflix, of course, is using these types of things to predict what kind of movies you might want to watch. And indeed, apparently, about 70% of the movies that we watch are actually dictated by an algorithm. So the content you're actually consuming is shaped by an algorithm. And if somebody changes that algorithm, you start watching different stuff. And in some ways, you become a different person because you have different information at your disposal. It goes even further than that because Hollywood is actually using an algorithm to decide which movies to produce. So Malcolm Gladwell has pointed this out in an article in the New Yorker, in which he points out that Hollywood producers actually use a formula, an algorithm, to predict hit movies. Pandora, all these companies, Pandora's a common one that you might know about music, which is, again, using this database of fairly mundane information about your musical taste compared to other people's musical taste, and can constantly sort of load up music that you will probably like based on this huge database. But here's where it gets even more interesting. It's not just about how music is getting to you, it's about how music is actually produced and how it's selected. So there's companies like Music X-Ray. There's a guy named Mike McCready who came up with this concept. What he did was he started feeding this algorithm, this computer program, lots of data about different albums over time. So he just kept throwing in albums, and then he noticed that there were clusters of the hit albums. They were clustering in different parts of his graph based on different characteristics. Now these are, again, the computer is not actually listening to the music. The computer can't hear the music. It doesn't have aesthetic appreciation of any kind. It's just looking at the data. And looking at the data, the computer was able to say there's these clusters of hit music. And so he then decided to test this out, and he took 300 albums that had never been heard, they'd never been released before, and he fed it to his machine, and 299 of them, the machine said, nope, these are no good. And then one, it said, this album's really good. It's got probably 9 top hits on it out of 13. And that particular hit, the particular album was this. And of course, that album did have 9 hits on it and became a multiple Grammy Award winner. And it was a sound that, again, nobody had ever heard before, and this computer actually picked it out. So now his technology is actually used by record companies to try to identify potential hit music. But then it goes even further than that. There's this guy over here, who's not far from here. He's at a UC school, and he is actually creating music in which what he's done here is he feeds his machine with a bunch of Bach, and then his machine actually scores a new Bach or new Beethoven or whatever it is. And then he has like a whole orchestra play this, and music aficionados, music theorists, music composers, they all come to see this, and they see this orchestra playing like a new Beethoven, and they're like, my goodness, where did you discover a new Beethoven? And then he has to reveal that, oh, my computer did this, and then they go into a rage, because this is like supposed to be the last bastion of human creativity, and here it is like a computer creating this stuff. And I'll just give you one last one here. This is a score, right? Wisconsin 51, UNLV 17. Since 2010, 2011, most of those immediate scores that you get, and with articles, are actually written by computers. And there are some people who think that that's probably just the beginning. I forget who it was now. Was it Lev Manovich? Somebody in journalism might know. But I think it was Lev Manovich predicted that by the year 2017, you may have a Pulitzer Prize won by a computer. So this is a very interesting time. Again, like these intellectual technologies actually taking over vast areas of things that used to be thought of as distinctly human. And it can kind of start to feel like our house is burning, right? Like, what's happening here? And are we pursuing technologies that maybe we'd rather not to maintain some sort of humanity here? So the idea, again, media change, relationships change, communities change, societies change, we change. There's some interesting research in this area now on the we change part, right? This, how much are we changing in particular? So a lot of people talk about the net generation and so on. Jean Twing calls it Generation Me. She says, the subtitle here is why today's young Americans are more confident, assertive, entitled, and more miserable than ever before. And she has a lot of statistics. She goes back to the 1950s, and she looks at studies of college students from the 1950s on to the present. And she compares from the 1950s to the present. For example, in the 1950s, only 12% of college students agreed with the statement, I am an important person. By the 1990s, about 88% agreed with that statement. So like this is a huge switch, right? She has a lot of other really, really good statistics in there. And it all points to this idea of the confident, assertive, entitled, yet more miserable. Now, why are they miserable? One example would be, for example, they all think that they're important. They all think they're the next American Idol. They all line up for the show. And then when they discover they're not, they're shocked. But there's really more to this than what she's leading on. This is really more broadly, as we watch on here, this is really more broadly the search for identity and recognition in a new media landscape, which is to say, a lot of what you see on Facebook, and if you've seen the PBS documentary Generation Like, pretty fascinating. And again, it's also very much about the search for identity and recognition in a new media landscape. What this is, if you look at, say, my friends in New Guinea are not on the search for identity and recognition because they're going to do exactly what their parents did. And their identity comes through their relationships, not by what clothes they wear or how they present themselves or what their personality is and so on. Their identity for us, though, we are born without identity and recognition. We have to earn those things. That's why we go to college. That's why we struggle through our teenage years and into our early 20s, trying to figure it all out. And as Charles Taylor says, this is really the search for the authentic self. This is something we've been doing for many decades, and it's part of the modern world. He points out that there are really two slides involved here, though, that as we all are searching for the authentic self, there are two slides, and one is towards self-centered modes of self-fulfillment. We are constantly trying to figure out who we are, and in the process of trying to figure out who we are, we focus a lot on ourselves. And secondly, there's the negation of all horizons of significance, which is a kind of a big phrase that simply means we don't believe all the same things. We don't share the same ideas, ideals, values, and so on. We don't have the same horizon of significance. So the two things to summarize would be, on the one hand, we become more and more disengaged because we're more and more focused on ourselves. And on the other hand, we become more and more fragmented because we just don't believe and have the same ideas and ideals as everybody around us. If you summarize all of this research, you'd find that you kind of have what you might call a vicious cycle of the age of whatever, where we have like this like whatever moment, and the whatever is like actually a reality, right? Like, we live in a world of almost infinite choice. And it's, if you actually, look at studies of happiness, we've actually seen that as choice has risen in our lives, we've actually become less and less happy because we're always wondering if we're making the right choice. And these choices aren't just about, like, what products you're going to buy, but these are choices about who you are and what you're going to be. So in this world of infinite choice, we spend a whole lot of time searching for ourselves, trying to figure out who we are. And as we are searching for ourselves, we tend to have this uneasiness at every step of the way. Like, did I choose the right career? Am I doing the right thing? Am I the right person? Am I the kind of person I want to be? There are a lot of options out there, and you might start to doubt yourself. And in the face of doubting yourself, there's one possibility is that you can defend yourself. You just grab onto whatever you can. Sometimes you start celebrating yourself. This is where we get this idea of that this generation is narcissistic. I don't think we actually are narcissistic. I think it's just that we're, sort of trying to find ourselves in a vast sea of possibility. So as we're defending and celebrating ourselves, we end up with this fragmentation I just talked about. The fragmentation leads to complexity, and ultimately we come back to this sort of loss of certainty, meaning, and power, and we kind of throw our hands up and say, whatever. Like anytime you're overwhelmed, you just say, whatever. But there is some interesting things out there that could be turning the tables. This is at the dawn of social media. This is one of the first viral videos to hit YouTube. And this is One Man. He goes by the name One Man. He's kind of your quintessential lonely individual. He comes home to Sydney and there's nobody at the airport to hug him. So then he goes down to the mall to find a hug, and finally somebody hugs him. And in the early days, this just kind of spreads person to person, hand to hand. Again, this is the dawn of social media. We're not extremely connected in the ways that we are today at this moment. But then it does go to YouTube, and just as YouTube launches, and it gets tens of millions of views, and it resonates with people all over the world. So these things start happening all over the world. There were like 7,000 of these events just within the first couple of years after YouTube launched, and it became their first viral video. But of course, there's also this, always sort of like this spoof angle here. There's always sort of somebody talking back and having fun with it. And here you have the spoofster here.
These are really, really good. And they're not as smelly as the hippie hugs.
Now, and then as you guys all know, some of these like little spoofs actually are quite serious, right? So you saw that earlier video of the Dove commercial, the girl sitting there getting blasted with media. Here's what a couple guys did to remake that video here. So this video got like 1 million views in 2 weeks, and the two guys who made it were invited to the table with Unilever, which is Dove's parent company, and Unilever signed a moratorium on rainforest deforestation in Indonesia. So this had this immediate effect, and it really showed that there was something different about this media environment. And I think there's a lot of excitement about that, because suddenly it wasn't just media coming at us, that there was something that we could actually participate in, that this could be what we make of it. It doesn't have to be just something that comes at us. And there are a lot of people doing some really amazing things in this regard. For example, people actually taking on big interest, like at the World Economic Forum. This is weforum.org, and this is we-forum.org. Now, traditional media literacy used to be taught in the way that it was basically, can you identify your source? And make sure you don't go to the fake source, this we-forum.org thing. Make sure you know who your source is. Now, this one is real, this one is fake. But nowadays, media literacy is much different than that. It's not just about recognizing where your information is coming from and making sure your information is good. It's more like, can you actually create this? This is what a good media literate student would be able to do, actually be able to craft something like this, because this is a sophisticated statement that is actually making a spoof and in many ways a political statement against the World Economic Forum, saying the World Economic Forum is not really doing its job. So for example, even these videos down here are actually work. If you click on one of these videos, you get a spoof, a statement.
The source of our financial treasure was a violent plundering of the Southern Hemisphere.
So you get the idea, right? Like the Queen would never say that. But they felt like the Queen should say that. We need to start having some retribution here. So the two guys who did this are sometimes called the yes men. They've been gaming media for years, and they've transitioned to new media very seamlessly. They've been doing some pretty amazing things with it. So there's a lot to be taken from stuff like this that can be very inspiring. This is a video we did a few years ago to promote one of our campus organizations. And so you'll see what we did here is we just have a secret meeting, we pool all our money.
The whole idea behind today is the idea of students helping students. What can we do for our fellow KC students?
And so every year, like at the beginning of the semester, there are these coupons that people give out that look like money, and then inside it's just a bunch of advertisements and stuff. And we have real money, so we're just going to stand with the people with the coupons, but actually hand them real money. And then on the inside here of the union, we've lined up 100 people or so, and we're just cheering for people as they come in. And people don't know why they're getting money and why they're getting cheered for. It's just random kindness. And then we moved down to the cafeteria, and we just started buying people lunch. And then we sent some people down to the bookstore, and we had them interview different people to find somebody who could really use some help on their textbooks. Because we had a big pile of money. We were having a hard time figuring out how to spend it. And we thought this would be a really good gesture. So basically we just run in, throw our money on the table, and then we run out. And then we ran out of money. So now we're down, this is in Aggieville, this is kind of our main little college town area. And we decided to help this guy park. And you can barely see it. There's a girl here crossing the street. So this is basically just a little campaign we did, basically to explain what K-State Proud is. Because all these people wear these t-shirts that say K-State Proud, but there's actually a meaning behind it. Every dollar donated keeps people at K-State when they need it most. Here's an example.
My test results came in, it was cancerous, and I was like, oh, I'm 20, this is, no one in my family's ever had cancer. Knowing that people had faith in me, it kind of got me back on my feet, being oh, I'm good enough, I can get these things, and it had a really big impact.
I would just like to thank the people involved in it, because if it wasn't for them, I still wouldn't be here today. And if I wasn't here, I couldn't make the impact that I am on campus.
So the real joy of this was, obviously creating it. Our plan when we created this was to get it out to all 23,000 Kansas State students so they would understand what K-State Proud is all about. But lo and behold, it actually went out to over 100,000 people. And suddenly we were actually getting donations from all over the world. This was an email we got from some guys in Canada who actually wanted to know not only how they could donate, but they also wanted to start their own. And in the process of all this, there were at least 5 that we know of, 5 other programs like K-State Proud started at campuses all over the world. So that was another really great output of this. So obviously, again, social media kind of doing this amazing thing of allowing us to send our messages out farther than we ever imagined. But there's another aspect of social media that I think is often overlooked, and that is that, and not just social media, but our capacity to work together online. Here's a group of 200 students at Kansas State. These are all landscape architecture majors. And what we did with them is we took, this is OpenStreetMaps, which is kind of like the Wikipedia of Google Maps. It's not Google Maps, but it's OpenStreetMaps, and you can edit it. So you can hit the edit button up here, and then you actually get like an editable screen. And what we did is we sent these 200 students just scattered around our town. Again, it's only 50,000 people, so it's a fairly small town. And they mapped every road and everything based on a bicyclist and pedestrian's perspective. And so they measured like curb lane width, traffic volume. They put all the bike parking in here as well. And in the process, we were able to then run a quick little algorithm that did a calculation to see which roads were very dangerous, which roads were safe, and so on. And what we discovered was that our town is basically a series of islands. There's a lot of green spots, but they're all separated from each other. And if you actually want to bike across town, it's kind of difficult. So the students did all this mapping in just one day because of, with the technology supporting them, they were able to scatter around, do all of that in one day. They spent the next day making plans for how they could actually solve these problems. We invited in the city commission, the mayor, and the bicycle advisory committee, and got some press for this. And within a year, we actually had a new 5-year plan for our city. It actually changed. There are things now that exist throughout our town that would not exist if it weren't for this 2 days of these students working together. And we're now a bicycle-friendly community and that's something that nobody thought was possible even 5 years ago. And suddenly, here we are, a bicycle-friendly community. One more example I want to show is Sean Ahmed. This is now taking it global, right? Sean was inspired by Jeffrey Sachs, who said that we can end poverty in our lifetimes. And Sean thought, well, that's great, but it's not going to happen while I'm sitting in a big lecture. And so he decided to move to Bangladesh, and he took a camera with him, and he started making videos, and he started getting followers on Twitter. He had almost 300,000 followers on Twitter who were interested in what poverty really looks like on the ground in Bangladesh. And then these people actually wanted to help, so Sean had to, on the fly, develop some way to leverage social media to actually help people on the ground in Bangladesh, and it looks something like this.
Through your votes and video responses, we'll decide how I will be spending some of this donation money.
Hi, Sean.
Hey, Sean. Hey, Sean.
We donated. We were very, very glad to do so.
Here is my vote. Rebuild the school.
And if you listen to the music there, it's very interesting. And actually, that music is coming from OP Sound, which is a website that allows people to collaborate on music projects around the world. So that's Colin Muchler, who donated his guitar track, and then Cora Beth hears it and decides to add her violin to it. And then Vavrek grabs this and adds some drum beats that have all been donated. And that's where you get the music that you just heard. So this is like a collaboration across time and space, which is yet another amazing possibility that this digital landscape now gives us. All of these are leveraging technologies in humane ways to create a better, more interesting world. So what's happening here is a kind of a shift in this vicious cycle of the age of whatever. Instead of simply searching for the self in this world of possibility, there are some people starting to realize that, in fact, we make the world. Collectively, the world is what we make of it. And instead of defending and celebrating the self, they're actually taking chances and embracing their own vulnerability. As they do that, the fragmentation doesn't look like fragmentation. It doesn't look like a bunch of people believing different things. Suddenly, when people believe different things, it actually looks like a wealth of differences in which you want to invite connections. And you don't see the world as complex and overwhelming. You see it instead as a symphony that you want to join in. And instead of feeling a loss of certainty, meaning, and power, you feel a sense of wanting to celebrate the actual while pursuing the possible. And so whatever becomes not a throw your hands up whatever, but instead more like a, we can do whatever. We can do whatever it takes by whatever means possible to make this a better place. So let me end then with an example of this virtuous cycle. This is Eric Whitaker's choir, which you may have seen before. He releases music online for free and then films himself conducting the music and allows anybody in the world to sing along. So here, 185 people from 12 countries are singing along with him. And I think it's beautiful to think of this metaphorically for what is kind of the best of what the digital landscape can be. It allows us to find our voice and then share our voice with a large number of people. But what's beautiful about it is that our voice sounds so much better in the context of everybody else's. That when we work together, it actually brings out the best of each one of us. And this can be taken quite seriously, right? This is the elections in Kenya about 4 years ago. These 4 Kenyans got together in the violence that ensued and created Ushahidi Kenya. Ushahidi means witness in Swahili. And this allowed people with ordinary cell phones to report what was happening and then receive reports about what was happening on the ground. And this basically released 45,000 people as citizen reporters to report on what was happening when traditional media had broken down. And then they gave away that platform. So when the Haiti earthquake happened, these students at Tufts University were able to implement the same platform, calling it Ushahidi Haiti, and they received hundreds, then thousands, tens of thousands, finally hundreds of thousands of messages that said things like, "We're looking for Gaby Joseph, who got buried under Royal University." And these are all instantly translated by 5,000 volunteers around the world. They're mapped, not using Google Maps because it wasn't good enough. They were using OpenStreetMaps, and people all over the world were tracing satellite imagery to make sure the maps were as good as possible for the people on the ground. All of that came together for people like Clark Craig, who said, "The project is saving lives every day. I wish I had time to document every example, but there are too many." I say with confidence there are hundreds of these kinds of success stories. The Marine Corps is using your project every second of the day to aid and assistance to the people that need it most. So it kind of ends with a big question, right? I mean, I hope that I've presented some sense of like, there is kind of a darkness of technology, but it doesn't have to be a darkness if you can get your head around exactly how it might shape us. Can't let technology use us. We have to use it to create a more human world. Thanks.